Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Connections podcast, where we talk about maintaining our relationships on Allah's terms. I'm your host, Fatma Qadri, here with my co-host, Dr. Fariha Khan. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Fariha, how are you?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, I'm doing fine. How are you, Fatima?
Alhamdulillah. I thought we could pick up on our conversation from the last episode, where we were talking about the obedience mindset.
One of the points that you made in that episode I wanted to talk about today was we were talking about how it's really important that when you're raising children in their younger years, until they're reaching a kind of their age of discernment, when they start thinking about things independently, right? When they're intellectually coming into maturity. Until that point, let's say age 7, age 8, 10, before that time, you're instilling in them an obedience mindset where you listen and you obey. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you. He wants you to do this. This is what you need to do. And that's it. And you obey it, right? And then you said something really interesting, which was, but then once the child starts getting a little older, age 12, age 13, and they're implementing what they've been taught to obey purely on the grounds of obedience. Once they start implementing it, they start seeing how that has a positive effect in their life, or how it is a protective measure, or how it is in some way good for them. And then their certainty in that thing, that ruling of Allah, increases. So they've already learned to accept it, but the confidence in their, what the ulama, and particularly the ulama of tasawwuf, like the Sufis, what they would say is they're going from a kind of rational certainty to a spiritual certainty, like from ilm al-yaqeen to ayn al-yaqeen, they might say, right? Like real deeper certainty, more grounded certainty. Do you remember that when you were mentioning that in the episode? And you were specifically talking about hijab, when you just teach your daughter, okay, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you, having haya. And so we have haya, and the girl is raised in that mindset. And then when she starts seeing men looking at her or giving her unwanted attention, then she realizes, oh, I get it, why haya is so important. So, but anyway, it reminded me of this verse of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, often I think this verse is sort of misunderstood. I looked up the commentary because this part of our conversation reminded me of this ayah also in Surah al-Baqarah. That episode we were talking about an ayah from Surah al-Baqarah. This verse, when Ibrahim alayhi salam, he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show him how you revive the dead. He says, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. How do you revive the dead, O Allah? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to him in reply, have you not then already long believed? Like, أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ? Like, haven't you been a believer all this time? Why are you asking me this question? And Ibrahim alayhi salam says, قَالَ بَلَى وَلَكِنْ لِتَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. Of course, absolutely, I certainly have been a believer all this time. There's no doubt about the fact that you can raise the dead. It's just so that my heart may be serene in peace, like really be comfortable in what I believe, or you could say really certain in what I believe. And so like some people might interpret this as, God forbid, Ibrahim alayhi salam had some kind of a doubt. Like, can you really revive the dead? Show me proof, right? It's like astaghfirullah. And so the mufassirin of Ahlul Sunnah, they say absolutely not. This has nothing to do with shak. This is, shak would be on his part. If he had shak on the doubt on the fact that Allah could raise the dead, that would be a type of kufr. It would be disbelief. And that's impossible for the anbiya, for the prophets of Allah. But actually, what he's wanting is to really have confidence and really like shore up his belief, his already pre-existing belief. And so, I mean, we emphasize instilling in your children the obedience mindset so much in that last episode. But then once they have that obedience mindset, it is helpful to ask questions. It is helpful for them to go to the right sources and pose questions so that they can gain even more
Deeper
certainty.
understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's also not even just Q&A that helps shore up that kind of thing, like just understanding the why behind the rulings of the Sharia. That understanding or that greater certitude can come in different ways. So what happens is when Ibrahim alayhi salam asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he complies with the request by telling Ibrahim alayhi salam, take four birds, the four different types of birds. One is a crow, and I don't remember the other ones right now, but there are four different types of birds. Take them, you slaughter them, cut them up into pieces, mix it all up, mix their blood, mix their flesh, mix it all into like this, slush, right? And then put portions of that slush on four different mountains. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows Ibrahim alayhi salam how on his command, on the command of Allah, those birds from that complete mess that you would never imagine the birds could be revived from and even separated into a proper way. They each separate out into their separate bodies and fly away. And so, it's kind of like this concrete experience that Ibrahim alayhi salam has of the revival of the dead that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accomplishes, and it firms up his belief in it in a completely different way. And so, when you were talking about the girl coming into past puberty and she's starting to see the benefits of her hijab, it's like the same kind of thing, right? It's that experience. She already has the obedience to Allah mindset. She already believes. She already accepts him as her Lord. She's comfortable with that. She doesn't have any doubt about it. But once these things start happening, these experiences in her life start happening, she reads those experiences through that obedience mindset and is like, oh, wow, now I get why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did that,
Yeah.
Even more powerfully, I think that's like even more your own personal experience when you can read it through your obedience to Allah mindset is even maybe more powerful than just getting an answer to a question. I mean, unless by the mercy of Allah, Allah lets that answer really settle in your heart somehow. What do you think?
I agree with you. Of course, like you can hear about something and you can learn about it, you can understand it, but when you experience it, it builds a yaqeen from within or a realization like, oh, like I get this,
I mean, one of the places where it's really helpful for a child to have the obedience mindset already in place is in the context of the kinds of issues we deal with at Sila. So like, we talk a lot about the gendered rulings of Islam, women's roles and men's roles, and what does it mean to have specific rulings of the Sharia that are specifically targeted toward women, and why the men have other rules that are specifically targeted toward them. I mean, so like for example, I'll show to make it concrete what I'm trying to say. So, our article on the website, being empowered through Allah against sexual impropriety and exploitation. So when you asked me to present that in Chicago this past fall, we called it the Sunnahs that protect against sexual impropriety, I think it was, right? And when the first time when I presented it, when you had me present it to the ladies, I don't think you were there. Afterwards, after the presentation and everything, the Q&A and everything was finished, one of the women, she came up to me and she was like really happy about whatever we'd covered. And she said, I want to tell you a story. And I said, what? And she goes, I went to college at UIC, University of Illinois, and Chicago. And she said, I used to take the Blue Line. Her family lived out past, like towards O'Hare, that kind of area. Maybe they lived in Bensonville or something. But she used to go to the Rosemont stop, right? So she goes, I used to take the Blue Line train every day after university courses were over. She'd take it from downtown, from the campus to the Rosemont station. And the Rosemont station, like the ISNA station, right? So like that huge parking lot, and you just park and then you get on the train, right? So she goes, one day, it was evening, I was coming back from the university on the Blue Line, and there's this guy on the train who was making her really uncomfortable, right? Like she was noticing him having a lot of attention toward her, and it was making her more and more uncomfortable. You know how like women just have this instinct where they can just pick up when a guy is like creepy? So he was creeping her out, and she said, I noticed him noticing me, and it was making me more and more uncomfortable. She's like, it got to the point where I was so uncomfortable, like I was like, okay, maybe I can dodge him somehow. Maybe I can trick him to make him think that I'm getting off the train. So she got off the train at one stop, and she quickly got back on because she was hoping he'd get off, and he did. He got off the train. When he saw her get up, he got up too. He got off the train. But then when she got back on, he got back on too.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and she was like, now her panic is like totally mounting, right? And she's continuing down. Rosemont is, I think, the second to last stop on the Blue Line train. The last stop is O'Hare Airport. And so she's like going toward Rosemont, fewer and fewer people. Everybody's getting off the train at their stops. There's less and less people around. And she has like just a few people left on the train. And she's like, and I could just imagine what's going to happen. I'm imagining myself getting off at that Rosemont stop, walking to my car in the dark, old, giant parking lot. My car was at toward the back of the parking lot. I'm going to be all by myself, and he's going to follow me. Like she's like, this is crazy, right? So, mashallah, what she told me was, what I did at that point was I called my brother. And she goes, listen, I can't get off the train right now. I'm going straight to O'Hare to the airport. I'm going to get off there. You have to come pick me up. And he did, right? Her brother came and picked her up. And and it was like so interesting because it's like her story confirmed to her how amazing the rules of the Sharia are. And particularly, I think when she heard the presentation, because like so many things of what we talked about applied, right? Like not traveling alone, her brother had to come pick her up, the mahram, right?
Yeah,
Not
like
wanting to be
relying
alone.
relying on your mahram.
Not wanting to be alone, khalwa. I mean, it wouldn't technically, shad'an, it wouldn't be technically, but essentially the wisdom of the Sharia is clear, right? From this situation. You don't want to be in an isolated place with somebody because you're going to be vulnerable and it's not safe. And so it's like it confirmed to her the kinds of things we talked about. And it's not that, I could tell from speaking with her, it's not that she ever had a doubt about the rulings of the Sharia. Like she already sort of trusted what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had generally given her as a Muslim. But this experience concretized it and solidified her trust and her appreciation for what Allah had given. I thought it was just really powerful to see how that experience of hers helped her understand the Sharia and accept the Sharia, even more. Not that she had rejected it, but it's a higher level. It's that yaqeen thing that's growing inside of her because of the way it was confirmed.
There's so many moments like you'll have in your life where you'll realize, oh wow, this is why this is not allowed, or this is why you're supposed to do it this way.
Yeah, but if you're not coming at it from an obedience mindset, you might not see it.
Yeah,
So like if let's say for example there was a woman who wasn't coming at it from that experience, from that mindset, then she would be like, yeah, all men are creeps and in the same sort of victimhood kind of narrative that confirms to her how evil men are and how bad the system is. It's not fair that women are not always taken advantage of, more resentment, more anger. Or perhaps she would have been like, it's my car. I'm gonna go and it's almost like
yeah,
you can sort of act on the Sharia when you know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would want you to do in this situation, then you can do it. If you don't even know what he wants you to do, are there a lot of women who would have called their brother? A lot of them wouldn't. And some of them, they might have. They might think to call their brother, and he would be like, "What's your problem? Just get off and like turn your light on your phone so it's not too
yeah.
dark. Like
When
run."
you said this story to me, like when the first thing that occurred to me is that her brother didn't ask any questions, like I'm coming
Uh-huh.
right away. He knew, like my sister calls me, I go.
Mm-hmm. I mean, these are people who are thinking through the Sharia, right? Like another woman, what would
Or
she
it
have done?
shows that they live with the Sharia, like that there is a relationship where he feels responsible towards his sister. There is a understanding that that when you need something, she would have, if she didn't have a brother, maybe she would have called like you know
No,
another
I mean, I
relative.
know women who have brothers who wouldn't call them. They would like call their friend first before calling their brother. Just because, why do I need to call my brother? Like he's far away. I would just call my friend. And it's like, do you know what I mean? Like it wouldn't even occur to
Yeah,
them to use that option. But that option is the strongest option. And there's also like a barakah in following the options that Allah has given you, let alone the wisdom behind them. But there's like help of Allah that comes because you thought it through. That's what I meant by they think through the Sharia. Like maybe it's not exactly, I'm not talking about they knew what the rule was and then they exactly applied it. That's not what I mean. I mean, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying when he says, don't be alone with the opposite sex? The shaitan is the third party. What does he mean by that? It means don't do it, it's not good for you. Like you need to find a way to not let that happen. What does it mean when I'm not supposed to travel without a mahram? Okay, she's not traveling technically. She's not going over the travel distance and she's not alone. She's in a train, all that stuff, right? But the point is, when there's a vulnerable situation, you go to your mahrams, and giving them the opportunity to protect you is in itself a kind of Islam, a kind of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A lot of contemporary women will not even give the men in their life the opportunity to protect them. And so a lot of the men in our societies, what contemporary societies, they become desensitized to women's vulnerability because the women themselves don't acknowledge it. And so when we want to understand the wisdom and the why behind any Sharia ruling, it's become so remote because we don't even acknowledge the first principles behind why some of those rules have been created, that women are vulnerable, that women do need protection from men. Once you acknowledge those things, then that woman, she could do the things that she did. She could think on her feet, call her brother, and her brother could come. But if she didn't acknowledge those things, I don't know what she would have done. She would have tried some other solution, and maybe and that's it. If somehow they'll try to find a way to make things work. But as a believer, what we must acknowledge is the best way to do it is through the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. And our life experiences, when you have that understanding and that acceptance in your heart, then our life experiences continue to confirm that for you.
Yeah. I remember whenever we used to hear like in madrasa or when even people talk about marriage, the rulings on marriage, right? Like or in polygamy in Islam, a lot of it like I heard it, but I didn't really think about it. Like it wasn't relevant to me. It wasn't something that I gave it much thought. But I remember one time I was reading this book about Brigham Young, and it was a novel, and basically it was based in that community.
Mormons?
Yeah, the Mormons,
American Mormons.
the Mormons who practice polygamy.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a fiction piece, and as I'm like uncovering the experience of the character, it wasn't a fiction piece, it was like a memoir actually.
Mm.
And so so much stuff that I never paid attention to, I was like, subhanallah, this would never happen in a Muslim environment. Like the Sharia had so many rulings, like there were so many protections in place where story after story it was unfolding, like situations of abuse where you never think about it as a Muslim, but it was clear cut to us, like that this type of situation would never, because a lot of times people will compare like, oh yeah, well, Mormons practice polygamy like the Muslims, but they're worlds apart. And
Oh, that's interesting.
they're I feel even offended being put into the same bracket because there are so many rulings in Sharia in place. Like there were situations in there where, I mean, like things like you don't marry your sister, like the stepfather stepdaughter relationship. There are so many abuses in this polygamous situation that they have created where it ended up into complete anarchy and dhulm on the women, and on a large scale. And it wasn't until that moment, like how you're talking about your experiences, or when you hear about other people's experiences and it solidifies your understanding of there's so much hikmah in the Sharia, or like even little things my mom would tell me, like modesty around the house, right? Don't share a blanket with anybody. And I always thought that's so absurd. Like, why does my mom impose these things that didn't make sense to me? Then you get older and you have a friend who says, oh, such and such situation happened with me with a relative being inappropriate, or you hear from a youth you work with, like, this happened to me, I'm not sure. And then all of a sudden it comes together like, wow, the Sharia has put protections in place for everything. And one time my teacher, she said to me, I was telling her about a situation, something I was going through a difficulty in my life, and it ended up working out in a beautiful way for me. And so I went through a period of hardship, but it ended up in a very beautiful place. And so she said to me, now Fatima, you will remember the next time that Allah tests you, that you will keep your adab with him in your test, because now you know through your own experience, right?
What?
That Allah is taking care of in the moment of trial, in the moment of difficulty. She was talking about how the next time you enter a moment of trial, that you will remember this moment of gratitude and how everything worked out so well for you because you've seen it happen before. You've seen it.
Meaning, like you'll be able to trust in him and be happy with him
Exactly. In the moment where
while going through the difficulty.
exactly
Because
difficulty or confusion, you're in the moment of it, but you'll have to remember from other experiences in your life that, did Allah not take care of this matter for you and that matter for you, and did he not show you clarity in this and show you clarity in that? So why, when you're again, in that same situation, do you not remember that, look, Allah has a plan. His wisdom is beyond our understanding. And
Mm-hmm.
so,
Oh, that's,
yeah.
what's really interesting about what you're saying. It's well, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things about what you're saying, but one thing that's standing out to me right now is that spiritual understanding is a kind of experience as well, and and it also solidifies your belief. So, in the case of the woman who was on the train, she had a physical experience, like a concrete in her life embodied experience of the almost being on the verge of being molested and being saved from that physically by her brother, right? And so the gratitude and the understanding and the appreciation for the Sharia that developed from that is because she had a certain physical experience that concretized for her, increased her certainty in the wisdom of the Sharia. But sometimes there's not a physical thing that's happened. It's just your realization of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is present, like some kind of a spiritual understanding that also serves to help you accept certain rulings of the Sharia,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
There was something that I actually struggled with so then when we did that, the sunnahs that protect against sexual impropriety, you guys had me do it for the high schoolers. Remember the principal was present
Mm-hmm.
for the school, and
Mm-hmm.
she had asked me to do it for the upperclassmen. And she said, the 11th and 12th graders, the upperclassmen of our high school, could you please come and do this presentation over there? And I'm like, sure. And I'm like, you mean the girls, right? And she's like, no, both the boys and the girls. And I'm like, both the boys and the girls. I was like, okay. And so, and you guys, you were so convinced about the fact that it would be really good for all of them. And I was sort of struggling. As I prepared to present that article, in this forum to the girls and boys both, I was like, okay, I get how I can make the girls understand the importance of these sunnah that are mentioned in the article, right? Avoiding khalwa, being alone with the opposite sex, traveling alone, avoiding exposing your nakedness, right? All of the things that are mentioned, it's really clear for me because the woman's physical vulnerability and the protection that the Sharia offers her through these teachings of the Prophet ﷺ is really clear. And I was like, how am I going to how am I going to help the boys accept these into their heart? Like, how am I going to get them to see the importance of these same sunnahs? What is their incentive, right? Of them accepting it. And I kind of struggled with that. Like I struggled with how to make this hit home for the boys. And what I ended up doing is from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I realized the way to talk about it was to say that there are physical benefits of the Sharia, right? The why is behind, like why does the Sharia command X or Y rule? What's the reason behind it? There's like the physical, worldly, concrete reasons, repercussions for you following the ruling and repercussions for you not following the ruling. But then there are also spiritual ones. There's spiritual reasons for why it's beneficial for you to follow the ruling. And the example I used for that part, so I told this train story, the woman on the train story, and oh my gosh, the students were like they were at the edge of their seat when the guy got off the train and got back on. I heard an audible gasp through the room, through the hall. It's just like
Yeah, that's so scary.
it was so scary, Auzubillah. And so they could really concretely feel the relief when her brother came to her rescue and when she didn't have to be in khalwa with this guy out in the dark parking lot. It was like, duh, these sunnahs make sense, of course, right? But for the boys, I told the following story where it's something that I mentioned actually in the article, another article on our site called Sexual Responsibility, that one, where there was this hadith scholar named Sulayman ibn Yasar, and Imam Ghazali tells the story in the Ihya. This Sulayman ibn Yasar, he's this hadith scholar, and he's also one of the most handsome of all men. Like he was supposed to be very, very good looking. And on one occasion, he's camped out alone in the desert. He probably is traveling, right? So he's out in the desert by himself, and this Bedouin woman approaches, and as Imam Ghazali tells it, she unveils her face and it was like the piece of the moon. She's very beautiful herself. And she tells him, satisfy me. And he thought, an innocently Sharif guy, he's like, he thinks she's talking about food. So he like picks up some food and is like, here you go. And she's like, no, I don't want that. I want what a man gives to his wife. She's openly seducing him. And so he says, Shaitan has sent you to me. He freaks out. He's like, Shaitan has sent you to me. And he just sits down and puts his head between his knees and he starts crying. And he's like weeping without interruption, uncontrollably. Like after she beholds the sight, seeing him like this, she drew on her veil once more, covers her face, and she went away back to her family. And this scholar, he refused the beautiful woman's advances, right? Like he didn't succumb. He didn't allow himself to be seduced. And so you would almost think like he should be proud of himself. Like you passed the test. You didn't do the bad thing. But he continued to weep for days with shame before his Lord. And and
SubhanAllah.
he like, every time he would think about it, he would cry. And when I heard the story, it was actually being told as part of a dars that I was listening to from my sheikh, and I was like, why? But I don't get it. Why is he crying when he passed the test? Like, why is every time he thinks about it, he's weeping? And so I asked as part of I asked the sheikh who's giving the dars, I said, why was he weeping when he didn't do anything wrong? And when you think about Allah, why did he cry? And the sheikh said the reason why he was crying is because he was so overcome by the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him a trial that was just like the trial that Yusuf alayhi salam had, and he was a Nabi of Allah.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah, he was given a trial at that level, and he totally could have failed it. Like knowing himself as a human being, he's honest with himself, and he knows his nafs, and he's like, I know I could have totally failed right there. And it was only because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I passed, that I was even worthy of such a trial. I can't believe I was even worthy to be tried in the same way as a prophet of God. And then on top of that, I passed, and I'm going to get rewarded for it, a tremendous reward. And I have no dakhal in it. Like I have no part to play. All of it was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even my ability to protect myself from falling was from the mercy of Allah. And so that's why he would cry. And it was just like, that's an experience. That's an experience that this scholar had, that God, Allah is there. He's with me and he's present, and he's made these things happen, and the rulings of the Sharia are there in my benefit. Like he's understanding it in a certain kind of way of how I'm benefiting from this purely at a spiritual level. I'm going to benefit from me not succumbing to the sexual advances of someone else. And that's an experience too that helps shore up your confidence. I told this story. I didn't tell it in that the Being Empowered article. But I told it in this session of yours in the high school, and the
Mhm.
boys really got it. Like I could tell that they really got it. That was the amazing part. I was just like, it worked. They got the fact that there's spiritual benefit.
No, that's beautiful, mashallah. No, I was saying like how we don't often like like in the way that we talk about exploitation or like predators, people, for example, the guy on the train, like we put them in this type of bracket, like evil people bracket, where there's these type of people that harm women, or they do these types of inappropriate, like harmful acts as predators. But what we don't really say, and I think that the Sharia does recognize, is that even an average person, when they're put in that situation, like that man, right? Like he was in a place where he could overpower her strength and he could cause harm to her, and that can be sometimes somebody that you might not realize is like a normal person. Meaning, if
Mm.
you put yourself in a situation where you have khalwa with women or someone who you preside over, maybe you could put yourself in a situation where you will be tempted to harm them,
You as a
and
man.
you as a man. And
Hmm.
we don't talk about this because it's like maybe it's taboo, maybe we've demonized like the attacker to an extent that we just think they're another kind of species, and every other man is like good and normal, and only a certain type of people do that. But the truth is that the shaitan becomes a third person, and you could become aware of the fact that I have power and strength over this person. I have power and position or whatever, where I can
Mm.
harm this person and get away with it. And
A'udhu
that is a
billah.
massive test
Hmm.
that people are put in more often than we might even want to realize is true.
Knowledge. Yeah.
And that is a protection for the man as well. That don't be in a khalwa with a woman. Don't be in a situation where you will be tempted to do something inappropriate.
Hmm. Oh, that's it. It's interesting. You've completely diverted the matter towards something very different. So, in the case of the Hadith scholar Sulayman, when he is in that situation, this is a situation where there's mutual attraction. right?
Hmm.
I mean, he's the one who just said she had the face of the moon. Like he noticed she's really beautiful, right? So it's mutual attraction. She wants him, and hamma biha, like he was wanting her too, like Yusuf alayhi salam. And then something happened and he just sat and cried instead, right? So, it's like that is a realization of the fact that I it's a very subtle kind of thing of I don't know even know if I'd be able to convey it exactly. But if we're talking here in this episode about understanding the why behind the Sharia, if you think of the Sharia as the key to gaining closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Let's
Hmm.
think let's think of the Sharia that way, not just the best way to regulate society or the best way that human beings should get along in a society so that things are smooth and things don't go wrong. But let's make it as broad as possible. The Sharia's supra goal of the Sharia is that it takes you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? The meaning of the word Sharia is a path to water. What is that water? It is that your experience of Allah kind of thing, right? So in that way, these rulings, by him following the rulings, he was given a closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he felt. Gratitude is a manifestation of you feeling closeness to Allah that he didn't have before. He didn't have it and then he had it, so he's closer, right? But in the case of what you're saying, it's really different actually. It's an acknowledgement of the potential to slip that each one of us has, not just men. I mean, I'm uncomfortable making it just about men because that's what our society wants to do. There's just so much distrust in contemporary liberal society for anyone who's in a position of power, as if someone in a stronger position always has the tendency to want to take the right of the other person.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's useful to think about things like that, but essentially, how did the Prophet ﷺ, when he warned us, what did he say? He said, a man and woman, if they're alone together, the third party is the devil. And he didn't say the one who's going to slip is the man. He
Hmm.
just said the third party is the devil. Somebody's going to mess up, maybe both of them. In the case of Sulayman bin Yasar, it was the woman who was messing up, right? But I think what you're saying is really important also because rather than in a way, you're also saying kind of what I just said about not demonizing men. It's not that they're demons. It's just that there are human tendencies. If you have a tendency as a human being, a certain inclination, and then you happen to find yourself in a position where you could act on that inclination, even if the other person doesn't want to cooperate, you might just very well do it. And stopping yourself from that, the Sharia is the thing that will help you stop yourself. But how does that relate to understanding the wisdom behind the Sharia rule? Because you acknowledge potential of doing wrong that you also possess, and you don't see yourself invincible, morally invincible like that.
Well, I guess you would say like because it makes you realize it's actually what you said. It's realizing your vulnerability that you as a man or a woman can slip at any
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
And you can, as a man or a woman, you're vulnerable to sin. And so following the rulings of the Sharia becomes a protective barrier for you.
Mhm.
Even if you are a person who is struggling with ill intent or you have, like you said, like an inclination that could be oppressive.
Yeah, that's nice. So it's the more you practice the Sharia, or the more you understand or learn the Sharia and understand it with the humble mindset, you actually begin to understand what Allah is trying to tell you about your own self. Like you're not morally invincible. You don't have as much self-control as you think you do. You need to be careful in order to do things right and for things to go well in your life. Like you have, I think that's a really interesting point. And you know what was really interesting for me when I did that presentation for the upperclassmen in the high school, as I told you, I was unsure as to whether this would really hit home for the guys. I figured it would for the girls because of the kinds of examples, I told other stories too, taken from the article and just like other stories. And it's obvious that vulnerability is understood as something that women have to face in terms of this, especially in the sexual arena. But for the boys, I was really impressed with the fact that they understood the importance of what was being communicated. And one of the ways that I saw that was through after when the presentation was done and the questions they started asking, like the kinds of questions that the boys were asking. I was like, wow, they're understanding that the Sharia is important and that there's a benefit for me to follow it. And I mean, I could just get it from the nature of the kinds of questions they're asking. So one of the boys, for instance, he was like, okay, can I ask you a question? What happens? What if I'm on a plane and I'm seated next to two women? Is that khalwa? Would that be seclusion? Would that be something haram? And I was like, no, that wouldn't be haram. And I explained it to him, right? But I was just really impressed with the fact that they were thinking that carefully about the matter. And the fact, why would anyone even think to ask that question? Only if you already are in a place where you are wanting to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you understand that following the rules of the Sharia is going to protect you from disobeying. That's the only reason why you would ask that. And so it's like he got it. He understood the value of the Sharia and the why of the Sharia on that hukm.
And they're the group you were speaking to is older and they have more life experiences where, as you're explaining, they're probably saying like, yes, this makes sense. Yes, I have heard or experienced things where this is making a lot of sense to me.
But what was really impressive was the fact that a lot of what I said could have been taken the wrong way. If a majority of the audience was coming not from that position of already accepting Allah and His Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and His Deen to be true, then there would be some resistance to the kinds of rulings that were being shared. Some of these rulings are not easy for contemporary people, in particular contemporary women, to accept. Why shouldn't I travel without a mahram, for instance? And but the fact that they were already kind of on the same page of trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I don't completely get it, but I trust him, right? So now when you start having personal experiences, or when you start hearing stories, and then you're mapping those stories onto your own personal experiences and where something might have gone wrong in your life, oh, I see why. Because maybe if I had not done this thing, it would have been better. Or, this is something that's making me uncomfortable in my life. I see now the way out of it. I need to do X, Y, Z, and I'll be protected. That relative who makes me uncomfortable would keep your scarf on in front of him, even if he's a mahram. Just like, don't be alone with him, And so this is giving you kind of an understanding of the wisdom behind the Sharia rulings and a way to apply it in a next level way.
Yeah.
I mean, the point being overall that the obedience mindset is really important, but then a lot of things can help concretize that for you as the believer goes through life. And life experiences are a really important part of that.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you. No, I benefited a lot from this conversation. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today on the Connections podcast. To stay updated on the work we do at the Sila Initiative, sign up for our newsletter at the bottom of our homepage at thesilainitiative.org. You can also subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Telegram, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.